onwards in Shanghai, and watched the city grow, got bitten by the China bug. Everything was really different than it was now, and so you can kind of feel that it was going to be something. And fast forward, after I graduated from college, there was absolutely no way I could sit in a cubicle in the States working for an entry-level position. So that was during the dot-com bubble, and I picked up and went to Shanghai. Ended up spending 5 years from 99 to 2004 as head of marketing for Home Shopping Network's joint venture, trying to get 1.3 billion people to buy from TV, which was a lot more difficult than it sounds. And yeah, it was. And so moved back in 2004, and fast forward to where I am now. It's been a really interesting journey, because I basically moved back because I was your typical 28-year-old girl going, I'm never going to get married in Shanghai. I'm not going to find a good guy. And lo and behold, when I went on a trip to Hawaii, I found a guy. And I ended up getting married, came back to the States, and had a baby, thought I wanted to settle down. And, 2 years, when my son was 2 years old, I started really missing China again. And those of you who are involved in China business know that even when you're gone 6 months, you feel like you're missing out, and like you're going to go back and see a new skyline. And so there's this kind of feeling where, especially when you're in Los Angeles, things are a bit slow. So what I ended up doing was an opportunity came up, and this was in '07. I started a podcast show for Entrepreneur Magazine called The China Business Show, and all I started doing was exactly what I've been wanting to do. Upon moving back to the States, I became frustrated by, I went through a period of reverse culture shock, so I became really frustrated by Western media's portrayal of China, the one-sided view that we get all the time. I was also really frustrated with a new kind of, you just notice that there's people that aren't China experts that would set up offices in the States or come up in search results saying, China experts, market entry experts, we know everyone in government relations. And I was just like, hold on a second, I know that guy. He used to teach English for 2 months. No offense against people who teach English, but what became apparent was there were people taking advantage of the fact that after 20, 30 years of being open to the Western market, there's still a lot of people out there who don't know anything about China, because there seems to be like this buffer, I call it, of information that it just, those who know don't share, or there's no platform to share it. So from the show, I used that as an opportunity to just start interviewing people. And all it is that you can go on the site. I've relaunched it into a different format, took a few of my podcasts that I like on there. But it's just, what I always do is just kind of pretend I'm just eavesdropping on like having you guys eavesdrop on just a typical conversation with anyone. Ask the questions, what brought you here? What keeps you here? What are some challenges? Give us some horror stories, just your experiences. And I find that that's how I've learned from doing business there. It's just kind of either being on the ground doing yourself or learning from people who have. And so there I am. But the interesting thing about that podcast show is after you start interviewing people, you get these strange emails thinking that you're the China expert because you've got access to people with information. So all these kinds of emails started pouring in, such as like, I'm an olive oil importer, or where can I go? Can you connect me with so-and-so in this sector and this? And I'm just like, I have no clue. But obviously there's a void in the market, and there's a lack of a platform. So I ended up, I launched the China Business Network, which I brought in my business partner, and that was in '08. Brought her in, and basically it's a platform that's relaunching soon, but it's a membership-based organization, and it's online-based. I just call it LinkedIn, Facebook for China business people. And so we spent the past year working on the whole site, just catered to people who are just involved in cross-border. And so that's something that if you hear about, you should look out for. That's it. And so right now what happened is we got our first round of funding, and me and my adult ADD has so many other things I want to do in the cross-border space, including the Geeks on the Plane tour. And so I sold my shares, and I'm in the middle of right now, a few of my friends in Silicon Valley are setting up a venture advisory firm where they're just focused on the cross-border side. So it's really exciting because for someone like me who grew up in the States and lived and worked in Shanghai for 5 years, I always felt like I was at a disadvantage because I don't speak Chinese fluently. I worked in an American company where everyone spoke English, and it's retail, it was really hard to learn. So I always felt I was in a disadvantage, but now the bridge has kind of widened or extended to a point where there's a two-way. I'm starting to see that there's just as much of a need for people based in the UK or based in the US, because the Chinese companies are starting to go overseas now and expand and globalize. And the one thing that I've learned is, just as we've spent so many years trying to figure out how to enter the China market, a lot of Chinese companies have no clue how to enter the Western market, and that actually presents an opportunity. So that's just it in a nutshell. Specific to the Geeks on the Plane tour, and I'll just open it up for questions, but it was just a crazy idea we had where last November it started with a blogger tour I did where, again, out of frustration, sitting there in the States, I was with a friend in Palo Alto, and we were just talking about the latest TechCrunch article. Is Mike Butcher in the room? Well, we're talking about the latest TechCrunch article where, you know, again, it's just your typical coverage of China. Censorship, China cracks down, like just this sensational thing that they always talk about. And I'm like, you know what, there's so much innovation going on there. I've got so many friends doing startups and all these great stories of how they localize technology, and none of that's being covered by TechCrunch. And it's really not their fault, because maybe they don't have access to the market. So a friend of mine who was sitting there, we're like, you know, let's just get a bunch of bloggers together and let's just take 6 of them or so and bring them to Beijing, Shanghai. Let's time it around the CN BloggerCon, the annual CN BloggerCon conference in Guangzhou. So that's what we did in November, and that went really, really well. And Geeks on the Plane is kind of like an evolution of that, where after the blogger tour, we decided we wanted to. Are people saying mean things? Okay. I'm always paranoid when people put things on the screen. It's just like, oh well. And so Geeks on the Plane was.
Mike Butcher is like.
Yeah, I was going to say something snarky. Geeks on the Plane was just this past June, but what it was is after the China 2.0 blogger tour, we noticed how bringing just a group of people over, kind of safety in numbers I call it, brought out a who's who of, you know, anyone you would ever want to meet in the China space there for that particular sector. So we had 6 bloggers and like 120 people show up for a cocktail to meet them, and it was really mutually beneficial, because in a scenario like that, you're not that one person hopping off a plane hoping that you can fumble your way and knowing someone who knows someone who knows someone else. You know, this is just it's set up already ahead of time, and everyone was able to kind of meet. So we thought, hey, there's a value to this for actual entrepreneurs and investors who are also interested in the market. Wouldn't it be great if we took a bunch of Silicon Valley VCs and tech entrepreneurs over to China? So you won't hear those stories about eBay goes over there and flops, and so-and-so company goes over there and flops, and maybe, you know, some really cool stuff can happen from it. And good timing, just around that time after I got back, I actually got a call from a friend of mine, Dave McClure, who is a VC for Founders Fund, which is the venture capital firm that's founded by the ex-PayPal guys. And he's saying, you know, my wife's, that's the Japan part, I'll skip through that. But my wife's Japanese, and I've been studying the Japan market for a while, and I've been wanting to take a bunch of people to Asia for a while, like, and his network is really strong in Silicon Valley. I'm like, let's do it. So we just, and he's kind of fun, so we just named it. We didn't name it anything like, you know, serious, like angel investors, or it's like, let's name it Geeks on the Plane. And I'm like, okay. So we went, did that. TechCrunch came along with us. So in this case, we just had one blog, but that's really the only blog we needed to take. And the rest of the group, Shaq's in the audience right now. He was one of the folks who joined us. But actually, you're a special case because you used to live there. But most of the people came there, they were first timers in China. But it was amazing because it was, once you take, again, a plane load of people who start off and meet each other at San Francisco SFO, and what happens is, it was interesting because, one, you get a lot of folks excited in the local markets to meet 20 VCs, angel investors, and, you know, tech CEOs from Silicon Valley. That's how we pitched it, right? And they come out, so they had their event set up waiting for them. But at the same time, on the actual tour, you meet and start connecting with people in your own market. So, for example, if there was a Geeks on a Plane version for London, you, by the end of the 10 days, would all know who each other are and, you know, spend more than just, you know, these events kind of exchanging business cards. We had people, like, sitting on the airplane floor because our plane was delayed in Beijing, typing away, asking each other questions on the bus. And so what happens at the end is you build a strong network even within the group that went there. And it's always nice to know who else is also doing business in China when you're living outside of China, you know, and because what you find is you can build a community around that too.